Der Titel der heutigen Veranstaltung hat, wie kann das anders sein, in diesen Tagen, die Krise trägt die Krise in sich. Ja, da 10 Jahre Pariser Klimaabkommen, Wege aus der Krise. Wir können uns alle erinnern, wie schwer es war, dieses Abkommen zustande zu kriegen, wie viele Kompromisse es benötigt hat, wie viele Jahre verhandelt wurden. Es gab Fehlstarts. Ich selbst kann mich gut an Kopenhagen 2009 erinnern. Ich sehe Carsten Sach da hinten, der hat das, glaube ich, damals auch mitverhandelt. Jetzt sind wir seit 10 Jahren dabei und ringen um die Umsetzung, auch um Geld. Das Wichtigste, was dabei aber auch zu bemerken ist, dass sich in den 10 Jahren viel getan hat und viel verändert hat und viel gewachsene Zweifel am Multilateralismus selber zu beobachten sind, an seiner Relevanz, an seiner Durchsetzungskraft, am Einigungs- und Befolgungswillen der Nationalstaaten. Und deshalb steht nicht nur der Multilateralismus unter Druck, sondern damit auch die als Teil davon die globale Klimadiplomatie. Deshalb ist eine umweltpolitische Fragestellung, hier rede ich mal aus der DGAP heraus, auch eine außenpolitische Fragestellung, und deshalb gehört sie hierhin auch in die DGAP. Und deshalb freue ich mich auf das, was wir heute Abend von unseren Experten an Analysen hören werden. Zum Schluss möchte ich nur sagen, dass dies eine zweisprachige Veranstaltung ist. Wir werden auf Deutsch beginnen mit dem Ministersegment und dann die Keynote von Professor Rockström sowie die Podiumsdiskussion auf Englisch ist bei uns guter Brauch. So. Und damit möchte ich an einen unserer Partner auch zu einem kleinen Grußwort übergeben an Arne Dunker, Geschäftsführung der Deutschen Klimastiftung.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Kleine-Bockholz, sehr geehrter Herr Minister Schneider, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, liebe Mitstreiterinnen und Mitstreiter, meine Damen und Herren. Ich freue mich ganz besonders, dass wir diese Veranstaltung heute Abend in dieser Troika, in dem Dreigestirn von DGVN, DGAP und Deutsche Klimastiftung durchführen können, und bedanke mich für die Gastfreundschaft der DGAP hier und bei der DGVN insbesondere für die lange Zusammenarbeit, die wir nun schon pflegen. 2016 haben wir gemeinsam eine Wanderausstellung ins Leben gerufen mit dem Titel Klimaflucht. Ich komme jetzt gerade aus Braunschweig, wo die Wanderausstellung gerade steht. Die läuft immer noch und erfährt eine immer größere Nachfrage. Mittlerweile ist die Ausstellung zweiteilig. Wir haben 2 Module und beide Module sind bis in das Jahr 2028 hinein ausgebucht. Daran kann man erkennen, dass die Klimakrise, aber auch Fragen von klimainduzierter Migration und Klimagerechtigkeit eine immer größere Rolle spielen. Wenn man sich vor Augen führt, dass es hier 3 Organisationen als Veranstalter sind, Deutsche Gesellschaft für Auswärtige Politik, Deutsche Gesellschaft für die Vereinten Nationen und die Deutsche Klimastiftung, also 3 mit dem Deutsch im Namen, mag man ja vermuten, dass es vor allen Dingen um innenpolitische Themen geht. Wir wissen, dass die Herausforderungen nicht nur in der deutschen Politik und in der Innen- und Umweltpolitik liegen, sondern dass vor allen Dingen der Blick auch in den globalen Süden uns vor große Herausforderungen stellt. Und wir setzen uns als Deutsche Klimastiftung seit 2009, seitdem ich die Stiftung ins Leben gerufen habe, nicht nur für Klimaschutz, sondern eben auch für Gerechtigkeit im Kontext der Klimakrise ein. Sie sprachen eben die Kopenhagen-Konferenz 2009 an. Also die Deutsche Klimastiftung ist wenige Wochen vor der Konferenz ins Stiftungsregister eingetragen worden. Und tatsächlich war der Start so ein bisschen holprig, weil uns das Thema mit der schlechten Stimmung, die aus Kopenhagen zurückkam, fast so ein bisschen weggebrochen ist. Das haben wir dann in den Jahren danach immer mal wieder erlebt, dass es Hypes und Hochs und Tiefs gab, und haben das ganz gut durchstanden. Und vielleicht haben wir auch einen kleinen Beitrag dazu leisten können, dieses wichtige Thema am Leben zu halten. Und das ist ja auch einer der vielen Ziele des heutigen Abends, dafür zu sorgen, dass uns das Bewusstsein für die Klimakrise nicht verloren geht, aber wir auch eine Perspektive entwickeln können, wie wir aus dieser Krise rauskommen. Nach der Wanderausstellung Klimaflucht, die 2016 entstanden ist, haben wir 2019 ein sehr spannendes Projekt bekommen aus der Nationalen Klimaschutzinitiative der Bundesregierung mit dem Titel Klimagesichter. Dafür sind wir sehr dankbar, dass wir dieses Projekt mit Menschen mit Migrationserfahrungen nicht nur, aber auch eben aus klimavulnerablen Staaten durchführen konnten. Und ich bedanke mich bei der Gelegenheit auch bei der ZUG, die das Projekt und das Programm koordiniert, dass wir da so toll zusammenarbeiten konnten. Ich sprach die Wanderausstellung an, die ich vorhin in Braunschweig noch einmal besucht habe. Eine Figur ist mir heute besonders ins Auge gestochen. Also wir stellen in der Ausstellung lebensgroße Figuren von Menschen aus unterschiedlichen Klimazonen und Ländern dar, die über die Klimaveränderungen in ihren Ländern berichten und natürlich auch das Thema Klimamigration anreißen. Und das ist eine Frau aus Tokelau. Tokelau liegt im Südpazifik, etwa 500 Kilometer nördlich von Samoa. Und ich hatte das Glück, übrigens zusammen mit Manolo Tai, der nachher mit auf dem Podium sitzen wird, Tokelau 2019 zu besuchen. Und ich habe von dort 2 Sätze mitgenommen, die mich seitdem sehr prägen. Und der eine ist, we don't want to play victims. Also wir wollen nicht die Opfer spielen. Und gleichwohl wissen wir, dass insbesondere die Staaten im Südpazifik im Grunde die Suppe auslöffeln, die die Industriestaaten ihnen und anderen Ländern des globalen Süden seit Jahrzehnten einbrocken. Und der zweite, vielleicht noch prägendere Satz ist, we are not drowning, we are fighting. Und darin spiegelt sich wieder der Stolz, aber auch das Selbstbewusstsein und der Handlungswille, der uns hier in den Industrienationen manchmal zu fehlen scheint, die Heimat zu bewahren, die Lebensgrundlagen zu bewahren. Und wenn man in einem so fragilen System ist, da unten, dann bekommt man dafür nochmal ein ganz anderes Gespür, als es hier in unserem Kontext vielleicht der Fall ist. Insofern wünsche ich uns allen heute Abend viele Erkenntnisse und Einsichten und vor allen Dingen den Handlungsmut und die Perspektive, dass es Wege aus der Krise gibt und dass auch 10 Jahre nach Paris es viel zu tun gibt. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Alle guten Dinge sind 3. Liebe Mitveranstalter, sehr geehrte Experten, liebe Gäste, vor allen Dingen sehr geehrter Minister, lieber Carsten. Ich freue mich sehr, dass so viel Zuspruch diese Veranstaltung hat und ich freue mich natürlich, dass der Minister für Umwelt hier ist. Ich bringe 2 Erinnerungen mit. Die eine ist ganz frisch, die ist vom Samstag. Da war ich in Eberswalde und im Märkisch-Oderland. Und in Eberswalde gibt es einen hübschen kleinen Zoo. Wenn Sie noch nicht da waren, empfehle ich ein wunderhübscher Spaziergang. Und im Freigehege ist eine Leinwand aufgespannt. Und auf dieser Leinwand ist der Spruch: Die einzigartige Vielfalt des Lebens auf unserer Erde ist bedroht durch menschlichen Raubbau. Wenn wir nichts tun, könnte es zu spät sein, überhaupt etwas zu tun. Und meine Erinnerung, die andere Erinnerung, die geht 10 Jahre zurück, nämlich an die Verabschiedung des Klimaabkommens. Und ich denke, da sind viele verantwortlich gewesen, aber 2 sind mir besonders in Erinnerung geblieben. Das ist einmal der Generalsekretär der Vereinten Nationen, Ban Ki-moon, und zum anderen der damalige französische Außenminister Laurent Fabius. Und ich denke, dass beide einen unwahrscheinlich großen Anteil an Zustandekommen haben. Insbesondere der französische Außenminister war in diesem letzten Jahr, von dem letzten Findungsjahr zu diesem Klimaabkommen, unwahrscheinlich aktiv und unterwegs. Und er hat Menschen zusammengebracht, er hat unterschiedliche Positionen zusammengebracht und hat sehr geholfen, dass dann dieses Klimaabkommen verabschiedet werden konnte. Und das macht zumindest erkennbar, dass es auf die Akteure ankommt. Darauf ankommt, wie heutige Verantwortungsträgerinnen und Träger ihre Arbeit wahrnehmen, ob sie kämpfen, zum Beispiel für Klimaschutz, ob sie sich einsetzen, diesem Klimawandel sich entgegenzustellen. Und da, lieber Carsten, fällt natürlich eine unwahrscheinliche Verantwortung auf den Umweltminister. Und wir sagen dem Minister zu, jegliche Unterstützung für das Vorankommen im Klimawandel. Dir viel Glück und alles Gute und viel Erfolg im Sinne von uns allen. Das Podium geht jetzt wohl weiter an die Paneldiskussion. Vielen Dank.
So, vielen Dank für diese freundlichen Grußworte. Es ist meine große Freude, Carsten Schneider, unseren Bundesumweltminister, auf die Bühne zu bitten. Herr Schneider, nehmen Sie gerne Platz. Und ich will nicht viel Zeit vergehen lassen, denn Sie müssen leider schon recht bald los. Deswegen steige ich direkt in unsere Themen ein. Es wurde gerade schon genannt, 2015 eine Sternstunde der Menschheit, der Abschluss des Pariser Klimaabkommens. Wo stehen wir jetzt 10 Jahre danach? Sind wir inmitten einer Krise oder sind wir schon auf dem richtigen Weg?
Naja, erstmal ist es ein großer Fortschritt der Menschheit gewesen, sich darauf zu verständigen. Und es gibt in Demokratien Wahlen. Und einige der Länder, die das damals mit stark vorangetrieben haben, die Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika als wichtiges, größtes Land, hat eine Wahl gehabt, in der die Frage des Klimaschutzes und die Frage, ob es überhaupt einen menschgemachten Klimawandel gibt, eine zentrale Rolle gespielt hat. Und der jetzige Präsident Donald Trump hat diese Wahl gewonnen, eindeutig, mit einem Anti-Klimaschutzprogramm. Von daher sind wir unter einer großen Herausforderung. Ich sehe meine Aufgabe sowohl in der Bundesregierung, aber auch innerhalb der Europäischen Union darin, dass wir an Multilateralismus festhalten, dass wir zu den internationalen Vereinbarungen stehen, die wir getroffen haben und sie auch mit Substanz füllen. Wir sind jetzt in der Umsetzungsphase und möglichst viele Länder weiterhin am Tisch halten, um auch das Verfahren attraktiv zu halten. Das meine ich jetzt kann ganz altruistisch sein, aber man kann sagen, wir wollen natürlich den Klimawandel aufhalten, wir wollen die Erde, so wie sie ist, erhalten als lebenswerten Ort und insbesondere die Biodiversität und Artenvielfalt stärken. Ich kann aber natürlich auch, das ist das eine Argument, damit erreiche ich einen Teil der Menschen. Es gibt auch ein paar, die stecken den Kopf in den Sand und sagen, kann ich alles nichts machen, lebe ich noch 30 gute Jahre. Andere machen es zum hochpolitischen Kampfthema. Das ist insbesondere die populistische Rechte, bis rechtsextrem. Und für die ist das ja das Kampffeld schlechthin, auch im Übrigen in Deutschland. Hat zu einer Spaltung geführt und hat dazu geführt, dass wir zwar immer noch sehr hohe Werte für den Klimaschutz in Deutschland haben, also wenn man so abfragt, was ist vereinbar oder worauf können sich die Leute verständigen, aber auch bei uns nagt der Legitimationsdruck und ich kämpfe darum, dass wir das innerhalb der EU mit auf einem klugen Weg bis 2040 und 2045 oder 2050 auf dem Kurs bleiben, unsere Treibhausgasemissionen nicht nur zu senken, sondern auf Null zu setzen. Und dass wir das insbesondere durch technologischen Fortschritt auch machen und damit auch an den Rest der Welt, ich denke vor allen Dingen an China, ich denke an Afrika, vor allem an Indien, das Signal senden, wir bleiben da auf Kurs und sehen die Episode, die in den USA gerade ist, als eine Episode und hoffen darauf, dass sie zurückkommen. Viele andere Staaten in den USA, Kalifornien etc., sind ja noch sehr stark engagiert. Das heißt, man muss nicht ein Land gänzlich abschreiben und darauf setze ich auch.
Sie haben gesagt, Kurs halten, aber wenn wir jetzt uns den Klimaschutz auf der europäischen Ebene ansehen, warum gibt es noch kein neues EU-Klimaziel? Warum gibt es kein neues NDC?
Nö, es gibt jetzt einen Vorschlag der Kommission, den unterstütze ich. Ist im Übrigen auch im Koalitionsvertrag so verankert. Die dänische Ratspräsidentschaft, heute mit dem Kollegen Aagaard nochmal gesprochen, ich bin Ihnen sehr dankbar für Ihre Arbeit. Die versuchen, einen Vorschlag, also eine qualifizierte Mehrheit im Umweltministerrat dafür zu organisieren. Ich habe das im Juni in Luxemburg auch getan mit voller Unterstützung, neben dem informellen Rat in Aalborg. Es gibt einige Länder, insbesondere in Mittelosteuropa, bei denen ist es schwieriger. Es gibt aber auch einige, die da sehr vorangehen. Und jetzt gilt es darum, Frankreich, Italien, zu einem klaren Ja zu committen und zu gewinnen. Und insbesondere bei Frankreich ist, nachdem es jetzt 10 Jahre ist, einer der größten diplomatischen Erfolge, die die Franzosen in den letzten Jahrhunderte wahrscheinlich erreicht haben, für die ganze Welt. Und würde mal so sagen, jetzt kommt die Zeit der Bewährung. Und da setze ich auch auf den doch auch sonst sehr sendungsstarken Präsidenten.
Das freut uns zu hören. Also auf der Klimakonferenz in Baku vergangenes Jahr wurde ja zugesagt, dass bis 2035 für ärmere Länder 300 Milliarden US-Dollar bereitgestellt werden. Das setzt eine deutliche Erhöhung voraus von Industriestaaten wie auch Deutschland. Was wird Deutschland tun, um dieses Ziel zu erreichen? Und ist Klimafinanzierung ein Soft-Power-Instrument für die Bundesregierung?
Ja, das meinte ich ja vorhin auch mit, dass es durchaus attraktiv sein kann, da am Tisch zu sitzen und auch Weltpolitik mit zu bestimmen. Wollen wir es vielleicht militärisch nicht kann, aber als Softpower technologisch und meint es gar nicht so sehr für Deutschland. Wir sind da dabei, wir machen das, wir stehen zu unserer Verantwortung wie kaum ein anderes Land, auch zu unseren finanziellen. Ich habe die Mittel der internationalen Klimaschutzinitiative, Finanzierung bei mir jetzt im Etat, knapp 600 Millionen Euro, die sind durchgeschrieben, auch eine Finanzplanung. Da gab es auch keine Diskussion mit dem Finanzminister Klima, der wollte das auch genau so. Deswegen, wir stehen da zu unserem Wort. Aber für andere Länder, die ich da vor allen Dingen im Blick habe, ist China, mit denen wir sind ja bei der DGAP, in anderen Bereichen andere, schwierigere Diskussionen haben. Im Bereich des Klimaschutzes, unserer Erhalt unseres Planeten, brauchen wir sie. Und ich suche da auch die Kooperation und auch das Gespräch. Mein Staatssekretär Flassbart, viele von Ihnen kennen ihn, der war da auch in China vor 2, 3 Monaten. Wird das meine Kollegin aus Frankreich auch. Und es kann durchaus Soft Power und auch eine Stellung in der Welt mit sein. Und deswegen hoffe ich sehr, dass es uns gelingt, im BLM da Fortschritte zu erzielen und eben auch den Gang der Welt mit zu bestimmen und damit auch dieses zurück in den Nationalismus zurückzudrängen und wieder zu stärkerer gemeinsamer Kraftanstrengung, Zusammenarbeit zu kommen. Es ist eine Bewährungsphase, Krise, wenn sich seit Jahren, Jahrzehnten eine Krise, irgendwie immer Krise. Aber wir haben auch viele Fortschritte. Allein wenn ich die Reduktion der Treibhausgasemissionen in den letzten Jahrzehnten sehe, wenn ich den Ausbau der erneuerbaren Energien sehe, knapp 55, 57% in Deutschland unseres Strombedarfs wird daraus gedeckt. Riesiger Zubau in China, anderen Ländern der Welt, und das ist die günstigste Stromerzeugung. Und das hat ihren Ursprung hier in Deutschland gehabt, 1999 mit dem Erneuerbare Energiengesetz. Und das zeigt ja, dass auch was geht. Ne? Es gibt schon Fortschritt, manchmal ist er eine Schnecke. Hoffen wir, dass er wieder schneller wird.
Die Industriestaaten stehen ja in der Pflicht, Ländern, die stärker vom Klimawandel betroffen sind und weniger dazu beigetragen haben, zu unterstützen durch die Klimafinanzierung. Aber was können wir in Deutschland, in Europa, auch von Ländern des globalen Südens lernen im Umgang mit dem Klimawandel?
Ach, das weiß ich jetzt ehrlicherweise nicht. Ich kann Ihnen sagen, dass ich das Gespräch mit den Kolleginnen und Kollegen dort erst auf der Ozeankonferenz in Nizza gesucht habe. Da haben wir wir haben die nicht ausgerichtet aus Deutschland, aber wir haben, glaube ich, mit einer der signifikantesten Beiträge gesetzt. Mir geht es aber auch insbesondere, was die Forschungsarbeit betrifft, mit den Forschungsschiffen. Und wir stehen da auch dazu. Und ich habe dort sowohl beim indonesischen Umweltminister, bei der mexikanischen, bei der brasilianischen eine große Bereitschaft zum Handeln gesehen, erlebt, auch den Einsatz von Technologie und auch die Hoffnung, dass wir über Regulatorik in der, sage ich jetzt mal, einen Blick auf IAA, die ja gerade heute eröffnet wurde, Regulatorik und kluger Ordnungspolitik es dazu führt, dass wir Innovationen anreizen und dass wir über die Innovation zu klügeren Verfahren und effizienterer Nutzung unserer natürlichen Ressourcen kommen und so quasi zur Schonung. Und das geht, wenn man will. Und insoweit würde ich das mal als den Beitrag sehen, den wir neben dem finanziellen und unserer eigenen Verantwortung auch tatsächlich leisten sollten. Dazu darf man jetzt nicht zurückschrecken, sondern muss man die Cleantech-Industrie zum Beispiel, die in Deutschland mittlerweile in Studie des Bundesumweltbundesamtes großen Wirtschaftsfaktor ausmacht, eben zu unterstützen und darin auch die Chancen sehen. Und ich bin da in guter Kooperation mit den jeweiligen Ländern, aber ich sehe natürlich auch die haben eine andere soziale, infrastrukturelle Herausforderung, als wir das haben, die doch in einer sehr entwickelten, hochentwickelten Volkswirtschaft leben.
Wir treffen uns zu einer Zeit, die von Krisen geprägt ist. Sie haben es angedeutet, Thomas Kleine-Brockhoff hat es angedeutet, in Krisen des Multilateralismus, Attacken auf die Wissenschaft durch Desinformation, durch Funding-Cuts, Attacken auf das UN-System. Wie will Deutschland die internationale Zusammenarbeit im Klimaschutz stärken, trotz des Austritts der USA aus dem Abkommen und trotz diesen vielschichtigen globalen Krisen, gewaltsamen Auseinandersetzungen? Und welche Länder sind da aus Ihrer Sicht momentan zentrale Partner für uns?
Ja, ich habe sie schon so ein bisschen genannt. Ich würde sie, also ganz klar China, Indien, bevölkerungsreich sind die afrikanischen Länder, vorneweg Südafrika. Und natürlich der südamerikanische Kontinent, einfach Bevölkerungszahl und aber auch Dynamik. Und ich hoffe sehr, dass wir auch mit den entwickelten in der G7, wir werden ja G20 und G7-Gipfel im Oktober haben, in Kanada, auch mit Australien, auch, ich sag mal, dem früheren alten Westen auch die Deutungshoheit wieder zu gewinnen. Und nicht in die Restauration oder die Reaktion zurückzufallen, sondern an die Aufklärung und an die Wissenschaftsfreiheit und an die Attraktivität der Freiheit zu glauben. Daran glaube ich, dafür kämpfe ich auch und dafür bin ich auch Demokrat.
Und wenn Sie jetzt auf die COP30 in Berlin blicken, ganz konkret, was soll Deutschland für Schwerpunkte setzen? Was können wir für Schwerpunkte setzen?
Ja, wir vor allen Dingen der brasilianischen Regierung dabei zu helfen, dass diese COP ein Erfolg wird. Muss man, glaube ich, vielleicht die Erwartungshaltung nochmal sich neu orientieren. Ich glaube, dass wir allein, dass sie stattfindet, dass die brasilianische Regierung, die ja auch unter Handelsgesichtspunkten durch die US-Amerikaner unter starkem Druck stehen, da baut sich ja übrigens auch mit den anderen Ländern, die ich genannt habe, viel Druck auch auf, dass sie am Tisch bleiben und dass wir zum Beispiel die Initiative, die die brasilianische Regierung hat, ich habe das der Kollegin Umweltministerin auch zugesagt, den Forstfonds zu finanzieren, uns zu beteiligen, also im Regenwald, aber auch privates Kapital mit einzusammeln, dass das gelingt. Zum Zweiten, die Industrie hat einen großen Hebel, auch die Finanzindustrie, dieses doch sehr vorauseilende Zurücktreten aus allen möglichen Clubs, die man so gegründet hat und die man sich so grün draufgedruckt hat, weil es irgendwie modern erschien, das finde ich obskur. Also mir ist das ein bisschen zuwider. Ich finde mal, wenn man sich eine Verantwortung hat, übernimmt die, dann macht man das nicht nur so in Zyklen, wie sein Arbeitsvertrag läuft, sondern auch mal darüber hinaus. Und das erwarte ich insbesondere von globalen Unternehmen, insbesondere von globalen Finanzunternehmen. Und Da gehören auch die Deutschen dazu, insbesondere die großen deutschen Versicherer, Rückversicherer. Die haben früher, als es scheinbar noch schicki war, sich damit geschmückt und heute ziehen sich leise zurück und das akzeptiere ich nicht, sondern es ist ihre Verantwortung, auch über den Tag hinaus nachhaltig zu wirtschaften und vor allen Dingen auch darüber hinaus zu denken und insbesondere über die Finanzierungsseite, die ein ganz zentraler Nachfragefaktor, aber natürlich auch Kreditfaktor oder Eigenkapitalfaktor, Geberfaktor ist, zu kommen. Und da glaube ich, liegt es an uns allen, dafür auch als Verbraucher die Sensibilität zu haben und es auch einzufordern, denn im Endeffekt ist der Markt stärker und die Nachfrage des Marktes, als es vielleicht die ein oder andere rückwärtsgewandte politische Kraft ist.
Herr Minister, wir sind schon etwas über der Zeit, aber ich würde gerne noch 2 Fragen aus dem Publikum zulassen, wenn Sie erlauben. Gerne kurz die Hand heben. Ja.
Vielen Dank. Hartmut Fischer, mein Name von der Energy Watch Group. Fand Ihre Rede bei dem BEE-Sommerfest also total kraftvoll und auch so eine ganz organische Verbindung von Wirtschaft und Klimaanliegen. Mein Fahrgefühl ist also, ohne starke wirtschaftliche Argumente, es ist jetzt eine innenpolitische Sicht, kommen wir hier in Deutschland da nicht gut voran.
Ja.
Ich spitze es jetzt auch mal ein bisschen zu, also was da aus dem Hause Wirtschaftsministerium so kommt an Initiativen überwiegend. Da steht zwar Wirtschaftlichkeit drauf, aber also nach unseren Analysen treibt es eher die Kosten, also erhöht die Stromkosten, die Mobilitätskosten, die Wärmekosten. Jedes Jahr, dass es länger dauert, bis wir hier zur Klimaneutralität kommen, nach unseren Analysen kostet Deutschland 100 Milliarden Euro jedes Jahr. Die Frage ist, sehen Sie eine Chance hier in Deutschland, das Narrativ, das ja komplett so aufgestellt ist? Wir können uns eigentlich Klimaschutz jetzt nicht mehr leisten, deswegen geht es politisch zurück. Sehen Sie die Chance, da das Narrativ zu drehen? Und wenn ja, wie?
Also ich würde gar nicht, also ich sehe das nicht so, dass wir, also vielleicht bei der ein oder anderen Kollegin oder Kollegen mag das so sein im Kopf, aber ich sehe das weder in der Realität. Ich glaube, wir sind mittendrin in einem Umbauprozess der Wirtschaft. Ich habe das vorhin mit den Cleantech-Unternehmen genannt. Ich glaube, da steht schon eine Revolution an und wir sind in vielen Bereichen mittlerweile darin, dass sie die marktgängigeren Produkte, dass die Skaleneffekte auch kommen. Da darf man jetzt auf gar keinen Fall aufhören. Also so im vollen Lauf zu drehen oder abzubremsen, wo man denkt, warte ich mal vielleicht ab, das geht schief. Und Deutschland wir haben viel investiert, auch in den Bereich Erneuerbare, also ganz umsonst ist das ja nicht. Wir haben schon im Bundeshaushalt die EEG-Umlage, das kostet schon was, aber ist immer noch günstiger als vieles andere, also entweder Strom oder auch Atomkraft, Energieerzeugung. Und es macht uns vor allen Dingen unabhängiger. Über die Technologiefrage, also vieles hängt derzeit aber an der Frage von, kommt das wirklich? Wasserstoff etc. Und jedes Zweifeln oder jedes öffentliche Interview, was dazu zu Zweifeln führt, weil man selbst vielleicht zweifelt, führt dazu, dass es keine Freigaben gibt. Bis hin, dass die Banken vielleicht sagen, das finanziere ich nicht, weil ich habe doch gelesen, das. Und deswegen mahne ich zur Klarheit, Entschlossenheit und entschiedenem Handeln auf der Basis dessen, was wir in den letzten Jahren und auch in der Koalition vereinbart haben. Und damit wir nicht in einen Attentismus, in dem wir schon in Teilen drin sind, reinschlingern, sondern jetzt die Bremsen gelöst werden. Und dafür hat diese Bundesregierung sehr viel Geld im Rahmen der Sonder-AFA für 3 Jahre auf den Tisch gelegt. Und dann ist, wenn Wirtschaftspolitik zu 50% Psychologie ist, dann sollte man sich auch insbesondere darum kümmern und nicht zweifeln. Bitte.
Weitere Fragen? Letzte Chance. Ja, Herr Bildschirm.
Ja.
Frank Böttcher, Extremwetterkongress und Norddeutscher Rundfunk. Im Moment haben wir eine Struktur, bei der die Produkte, die den Planeten kaputt machen, günstiger sind als die Produkte, die den Planeten erhalten. Das bedeutet viel Initiative auch auf europäischer Ebene, das umzudrehen, damit wir durch unser normales Verhalten unseren Planeten nicht an die Wand fahren. Welchen Pfad zeigt Europa und wie kann Deutschland darauf hinwirken, dass wir diese Rahmenbedingungen so verändern, dass wir durch unser normales Kaufverhalten den Planeten vielleicht doch ein bisschen besser erhalten können?
Ja, ich habe das vorhin mit der Vernunft gesagt. Das gilt abstrakt natürlich, aber wenn es dann so um Einzelinteressen geht, einzelne ökonomische Interessen, ist es immer Betriebswirtschaft und nicht Volkswirtschaft. Und deswegen ist Regulatorik so wichtig. Das für alle gilt. Das gilt für die Landwirtschaft bei der Nutzung der landwirtschaftlichen Flächen und eben auch die Möglichkeit, dort Artenvielfalt vorkommen zu lassen, indem man ein bisschen was davon Blühstreifen freilegt. Das gilt auch bei der Nutzung von Energie. Und wenn Sie etwas nicht bepreisen und es billig und günstig ist, dann wird es natürlich genutzt, obwohl alle wissen, es ist eigentlich Quatsch, aber weil es ja alle machen, machen es alle. So, und deswegen ist die Rahmensetzung für den ETS 1 und 2 entscheidend. Und ich merke auch, dass sich die Individuen darauf einstellen, sowohl im privaten Bereich so langsam, darf es nicht nur so, also darf sie nicht so ideologisch hochziehen, sondern rational drüber reden und entscheiden. Und dann werden auch Anschaffungsentscheidungen neu gesehen. Und ich weiß, das kostet in Zukunft mehr, wenn ich CO2 emittiere. Und auf der anderen Seite eben die günstigere oder die Investitionen in Produktionstechnologien, die dafür sorgen, dass ich effizienter arbeite. Dafür braucht es Anreize, Regulatorik und darauf setze ich, weil wir in einer alternden Gesellschaft, deren Dynamik ein wenig verloren gegangen ist, braucht sich nur das Potenzialwachstum in Deutschland ansehen, so viel zusätzliches Geld nicht zur Verfügung haben werden, um unsere militärischen Fähigkeiten herzustellen, um es zu schützen, aber auch noch die Bonitätsfähigkeit in den Anleihenmärkten zu haben. Und deswegen ist das meines Erachtens die bevorzugte Wahl. Und diese Instrumente gilt es durchzusetzen auf europäischer Ebene. Dann geht es auch mit Planungssicherheit und nicht mit Zickzackkurs.
Kein Zickzackkurs, Kurs halten, entschieden handeln. Vielen Dank für das Gespräch, Herr Minister, dass Sie sich die Zeit genommen haben in Ihrem sehr vollen Tagesablauf. Wir haben uns sehr gefreut, mit Ihnen in den Austausch zu gehen. Und ja, herzlichen Dank.
Ja, spannende Veranstaltung, noch viel Spaß.
Nun darf ich auf Englisch weitermachen. I will switch to English now. Unfortunately, the minister had to leave a bit early today. But it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Johann Rockström. He is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and professor in Earth System Science at the University of Potsdam. Johann, without further ado, the floor is yours to give us an update on the state of our planet.
Thank you so much, Kira, dear colleagues, friends. So I wanted to tell you the story first of those of you who were at COP15 in Copenhagen, 2009. You'll remember the classic photograph, 3 o'clock in the morning, with Barack Obama, Barroso, former Chancellor Merkel, really pulling up their sleeves to trying to solve the climate crisis. And we left Copenhagen with a sense of failure. And another sense, which I recall so well, that give us just 2 more weeks and we solve this. We will tie this together and we will simply move towards a decarbonized global economy. It took us 6 years to meet again in Paris. And that was the moment of great celebration. We all remember it, when the world finally got together, was able to take a step away from the Kyoto Protocol with the Annex 1 and Annex 2. Everyone shared the same atmosphere. Everyone needed to step up and move towards a decarbonized, safe future for all of humanity. And everything was set for success. And now, 10 years later, we must unfortunately conclude that we have failed so far. We are still seeing emissions rising. We're still seeing a world moving very, very rapidly towards what we'll be publishing now in 2 weeks' time. So this is still unpublished work, is the 2025 State of the Climate update that is done every year, led by Professor William Ripple at Oregon State University. You've seen this right-hand graph here. This is the mean temperature on planet Earth since we left the last ice age. Can you imagine? It's a 14 degrees Celsius planet with a maximum variability of plus minus 0.5. 0.5. That's where you have the medieval warm period, you have the little ice age, everything occurs there, but everything we know of the civilizations that we have developed develops within this life corridor. And then you see the spike. We reached now 1.3 degrees Celsius. We experienced a 1.5 degrees Celsius world in 2024, the most expensive year all time in human existence on planet Earth in terms of droughts, floods, heat waves, disease, reinforced storms. But we're heading towards 3.1 degrees Celsius. And just as a key reminder, I know this room is well aware of this, but if you rewind the clock to find the last time we had a 3 degrees Celsius warmer planet, you have to go 4 million years back. You have to go outside of the Quaternary. You have to basically exit anything that has to do with a planet that has scientific evidence of the ability to support the world as we know it. That's what we're facing, and we have still not bent the curves. So unfortunately, despite the fact that we have this legally binding global Paris Agreement, a great success, we've come a long way, we're still not delivering against those targets. Unfortunately as well, if you enter the lab of climate science organizations around the world today, this is what we are today facing. We're seeing tendencies. I say tendencies because this is not published yet, it's not statistically verified, but this is how the data looks. Here you have the curves, you've all seen them. Global mean surface temperature rise independently measured from 5 different sources today. To the right-hand side, you have all the Argo buoys measuring sea surface temperature around the world. Temperatures are rising. It is the first lines here from 1970 to 2014, which has led to the conclusion that we have a global climate crisis on our watch. This is the linear relationship between our emissions of greenhouse gases and temperature rise. But then suddenly happens from 2014 onwards. The last decade, the temperature rate increases from a 0.2 per decade to a 0.3 per decade if you average it out. Now, this is deep, deep worry. We actually do not fully understand it. It's a combination of changes in forcing, meaning probably changes in air pollutants, which is a massive paradox because it means that we are reducing air pollution, saving up to 7-8 million people's life per year, a huge positive, but it bumps up temperature. This is the Faustian bargain, to quote Professor Jim Hansen. But you also see, unfortunately, that this cannot fully explain it. It has also to do, it must have to do also with changes in feedbacks of the Earth system. Albedo changes, the planet is getting darker. Cloud dynamics, ice is melting, tree lines are moving further north. The planet changes color, absorbs more heat. And finally, the scariest one is that we're starting to see the first signs of a biosphere losing, or not losing, but weakening its capacity to absorb carbon. This is the resilience of the planet, which seems to be showing cracks. Not a collapse, it's not an abrupt change, but it seems to show a sense of weakening. That's when we meet in Baku. But the trick is, it's starting to cost us. We know this. We're also actually having so much evidence of what's the journey we have to follow to be able to deliver on the Paris Agreement, to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius and aim for 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I'll come to 1.5 because, as you may know, in the run-up to COP30, Ambassador Andrea Correa do Lago, the COP president, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, has called upon science to help them frame the story on 1.5. What should we tell the world in Belém on 1.5? And I'll give you a little bit of a taster of where we are today. But first, here is the journey we have to follow. The gray curve is, we all know, we have to decarbonize and phase out fossil fuels at a pace today of over 5% reductions globally per year to reach a net zero global economy by 2050. The global carbon budget, don't quote me here, please, but it's ridiculously small. It's essentially consumed. It's down to 130 billion tons of carbon dioxide. It's equivalent to 3 years of emissions. But that's not enough. Look at that dark gray wedge there, which is the global food system that needs to transition from source to sink within the next 20 years. That, dear friends, is nothing less than a green revolution. But that's not enough. We also need to secure in green the carbon sink in nature on land, and in blue, the carbon sink in the oceans, meaning healthy planetary boundaries across all boundary systems. And the orange one is this optimistic assumption of scaling carbon dioxide removal technologies, which are today absolutely necessary for us to be able to take out carbon dioxide and avoid a trajectory away from the range of the safe levels set out by the Paris Agreement. This is nothing less than a global sustainability transformation. It won't be enough with an energy transition alone, and this is the least that has to be done for us to deliver on the Paris Agreement. Now, we also know that the risks we're facing are related to tipping points. We've mapped these, as I'm certainly that you know. There are 16 mapped climate tipping element systems. You see them here. 6 of them are actually in the Arctic region. Can you imagine? The Arctic region is today what I call the ground zero on planet Earth. They're tied together through the AMOC, the overturning of heat in North Atlantic. The Amazon rainforest is one of them. We meet in Belém. We have 3 of them in Antarctica. And of course, the one that is closest to collapse, the tropical coral reef systems, livelihoods for over 200 million people on planet Earth. We have now listed and quantified for the first time the risk assessment on these. I won't go through this in detail. This is the list of the 16. The dots here are the median risk levels, so the likely temperatures at which they are expected to cross their tipping point. Crossing a tipping point means an irreversible shift in feedbacks. A rainforest will move irreversibly to become a bush savanna. An ice sheet will irreversibly melt. Despite the uncertainty range in science, those top 5 there are likely to tip at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, abrupt thawing of permafrost, one of these bump-up feedback systems in the northern hemisphere, collapse of tropical coral reef systems, and collapse of the Labrador Sea Current, one of the regulating systems for the weather systems, not least in northern Europe. What does this tell us? Well, I would say it tells us the following. When the Paris Agreement states in the legal binding text that we should stay well below 2 and aim for 1.5, this provides scientific evidence that well below equals 1.5. 1.5 is a point of danger. And this was actually what the IPCC in its 1.5 degrees Celsius report in 2018 concluded. Exceed 1.5 and we enter danger. And as you all remember, the UNFCCC's Article 2 from 1992 says we oblige all states in the world to avoid dangerous climate change. That's why we have all the COP meetings. So the question is, has the IPCC confirmed what I just showed you? The answer is yes. Here you have 5 IPCC reports from 2001 all the way till the 6th assessment, and the risk assessment, higher, darker red, higher likelihood of crossing and causing irreversible changes. From 2001, so basically, what is this now? This is basically, yeah, it's roughly at the Kyoto Protocol state. We assessed that the risk was literally insignificant. We had to increase temperatures, we believe, by 5-6 degrees to cause irreversible changes in the Earth system. That was the state of science 25 years ago. Today, we conclude from the scientific evidence that already between 1.5 and 2, we enter the risk domain of triggering tipping points. This is the IPCC. This is the common denominator of consensus across the entire climate science community. So that is where we are today. But I also want to mention to you, unfortunately, just as I showed you earlier about this rate of change, which is concerning us, here are 4 systems that we don't fully understand right now. And one is the Amazon rainforest, where we conclude climate scientifically that the risk of tipping it into an irreversible change to a degraded savanna is actually quite low, with huge uncertainty at 3 to 5 degrees Celsius of warming. Again, basically outside of the quaternary level of warming. The Brazilian ecologist, like leading scientists like Carlos Nobres, tells us you're wrong. Because if we lose biodiversity and if we deforest the system and lose more than 20 to 25% of the forest cover, the system may tip already between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Where are we today? we are at 1.3 degrees Celsius actually, and 17% of deforestation. To quote Professor Carlos Nobles from São Paulo University, one of the leaders at the COP30, leading the science spokesperson at COP30, we are very close to a tipping point in the Amazon. That is the reality. The second one is that we have the fourth global bleaching event hitting the entire ocean system on planet Earth. The coral reef systems are not coping with the frequency of bleaching, and we're very close to a collapse. The collapse is related also to eutrophication, overfishing, and acidification. The third one is, of course, the AMOC. The AMOC, which is the overturning system that regulates the weather system in Northern Europe, but also actually regulates the heat exchange between the ocean and the atmosphere. And this system has collapsed in the past. It's slowing down, so far estimated with 15%. We know the physics here. It is this cold blob you see with a melting green ice sheet, which is diluting the high density saline water that comes flowing from the Southern Ocean. So it sinks much slower because of this dilution, which slows down the physical engine, the thermohaline engine. Is it likely to collapse this century? Well, the uncertainties are very large. IPCC says very low likelihood of collapse with medium confidence. The latest science shows that we probably underestimated that risk. If I ask Professor Stefan Rahmstorf, transparency, he's with me at the Potsdam Institute, he say the likelihood levels are coming close to 10%. 10% for a catastrophic impact is a very high probability because that means the risk is unacceptably high. That is where we are on the AMOC. And finally, we have more and more evidence that these tipping element systems are connected. What's happening in the ground zero in the Arctic via the overturning in the Atlantic accelerates melting of the West Antarctic ice sheet. So what's happening in the Arctic connects with Antarctica. So that is frontiers of science. It's not in the IPCC yet, but it just lands itself, in my view, to precaution one and action two. So this is my summary, therefore, what we are discussing right now to be the message from science on 1.5 degrees Celsius for COP30. Number one, 1.5 degrees Celsius is a critical limit. Exceeded and we enter dangerous climate change, meaning it's a risk threshold. It's not a physical threshold that we collapse, beyond which every 1/10 of a degree matters. Every 1/10 of a degree causes increasing extreme events. Number two, unfortunately, because of all the climate forcing we've loaded, we cannot avoid overshoot. So unfortunately, the best science can offer today is that we breach 1.5 within the next 5-10 years to have a 30-40 year period of overshoot before potentially coming back by the end of this century. Overshoot being inevitable. So as you hear, I say 1.5 is important, but unfortunately we will face a tougher period before potentially coming back. And finally, coming back is possible. And finally, just reiterating the fact that phasing out fossil fuels cannot be the only factor alone. Overshoot assessments comes from the IPCC. This is the IPCC C1 scenarios and C2 scenarios. So I'm just saying it's really grounded in the science. The question is, why would we come back after overshoot? The only way to come back after overshoot is that we deliver on the phasing out of fossil fuels, that we really come back into the planetary boundaries to keep the ocean and the land systems intact so they can suck out carbon and scale carbon dioxide removal technologies. So that is our task. It's very clear we need the planetary boundaries to guide us also in the climate transition, because this is a bit of the biggest mistake, in my view, that humanity has done. How can we allow ourselves to have a climate crisis by dramatically breaching the climate safe wedge beyond the forcing that the planet has been coping with over the past 12,000 years, and at the same time weakening the health of the planet by breaching the biodiversity, the fresh water, the nitrogen, phosphorus, the land systems, and the chemical boundaries. And in a few weeks' time in New York, we will have to announce, unfortunately, in the next planetary health check, this is the 2024 one, we've now, because of this urgency, promised to update the planetary boundary science every year. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be announcing the 2025 one. And if you don't tweet around on it, let me just share with you that unfortunately, we'll be announcing a 7th boundary being transgressed. And not surprisingly, it's the ocean boundaries, the ocean acidification trend that now has gone over the safe levels. But to close, this is the full assessment that we do when we put all the boundaries together. We do have a problem on our watch. We're outside of the green safe level, but we're not yet in this high risk red zone where changes are inevitable. We assess that we are in this yellow danger zone, which is the range of uncertainty in science, which suggests, one, we have a problem on our watch for sure, but there's still room to move around. There's still room to kind of shift back if we move very quickly and deliver on everything that we've signed on over the past 30 COP meetings under the UNFCCC. So that is the challenge. Let's get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very insightful remarks, Professor Johan Rockström, and for kind of setting the scene for our discussion now by explaining the state of the art on climate change to all of us. We're very grateful that you will also join our panel discussion now in a moment. You see that the stage is already prepared for us, and in the meantime, please let me briefly introduce myself and then also introduce the other panel speakers. My name is Oliver Hasenkamp. I'm working for the United Nations Association of Germany and will be the moderator for the panel discussion. You have already met two of our panel speakers today, namely Professor Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, and Dr. Kira Finke, who is the director of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy here at the German Council on Foreign Relations. I'm very glad that we have two more speakers with quite diverse backgrounds who will be joining us on the podium. And I first of all would like to warmly welcome Farhana Yamin. Farhana is currently a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow of the Robert Bosch Foundation, but she's also the director of the Climate Justice and Just Transition Collaborative. She's an international lawyer, an activist, and most interestingly for us today, she has been actively involved in the UN climate change negotiations for over 30 years, and including the negotiations of the Paris Agreement. A warm welcome to you. And I also warmly would like to welcome Manolo Tai. Manolo is a photojournalist and an artist who has worked extensively on the impacts of climate change, on trying to capture the impacts on climate change in his photographs, and also worked on the relationship between humans and their environment. Warm welcome also to you. Please join me on stage. Yeah, Manolo, I would like to start with you because you can add another dimension to this discussion and our event today. You describe yourself as an eyewitness of climate change, having traveled around the world and meeting people trying to capture the impacts of climate change in your photographs. And we are glad that you have brought some of your photographs. And to start this panel discussion, I would like to invite you to show us your photographs and tell us a little bit about the stories behind them, about the people and the landscapes we can see that are impacted by climate change.
Hello. I will try to make it briefer, that we have more time for the panel. But let's start right away in front of our door. This is on a hulk, Langeness in the North Sea. This is a teacher going to work after storm surge. And what is very apparent that the extreme weather events getting more and more frequent also in Germany, especially on the hulk, and that also the seawater is rising. Why is it important for us to have, for example, the coastal protection of a hulk? Because it's like a boundary for to save the mainland if there's a bigger flood coming. But as Arne Dunker already mentioned, we also went to places like on the other side of the world. This is in Tokelau, and they don't have any protection there, like no natural protection. So if they have the same problems, the seawater is rising and the storms are getting more. And this is what happens then. This is Jewel. She is looking at her family house, which was lost to a storm. And she was actually also telling the quote what Arne mentioned at the beginning, that we are not drowning, we are fighting. But if you look at it, these nations are sinking, and they might be the first climate refugees. I think there was some thing in Tuvalu that they will get some place in Australia. But there's more nations which face that. And then a lot of people will say like, well, these are just a few little nations, a few thousand people, not much. But I also went to Jakarta. Jakarta, the metropolis area, is like 30 million people. What you see here is like a part of the city which they already abandoned. On the right side, next to the man who lived in this area, is a wall which they built to keep the flood or the water away, because the city is sinking every year around 30 centimeters in some areas. This wall will not keep the water out, obviously, but they want to buy time because they're building a new capital 1,000 kilometers away on another island. For me, that means they gave it up. Of course, people will still live there, but the government moves. Still in Indonesia, in the Coral Triangle, this is a place where they try to replant corals. What we just heard in the presentation before, that the coral reefs are threatened heavily. With 1.5%, we will probably just keep 30% of coral reefs worldwide. With 2%, it will be around 0. That sounds really horrible for a tourist or a scuba diver, but what we have to see is like around 1 billion people worldwide rely on the coral reefs because it's a nursery for many fish species, and they will be gone. What will happen then? This was 2 portraits actually of a fisherman and a fisherwoman in Japan. I went there actually for a family holiday and to escape all the crises, what you see all the time. And so I still talked with them. On the left side is a traditional ama. They are diving since hundreds of years in the waters without tanks, oxygen tanks, to collect seafood. What she told me, something has changed in the last 6 years in their area. Suddenly they just have 20% of the catch left. 20%, so 80% decline. She doesn't know if she's maybe the last generation. On the right side is June. He's a fisherman and he is doing aquaculture. So something what people say like this could be the future for our fisheries if the fish are gone in the open ocean. What he told me that the water in the summertime now got so hot in the last years that if he fed the fish, they exploded. There was some chemical reaction and they exploded. So he couldn't feed them anymore. Just vitamins, which was very expensive. So it was economically hard and he doesn't know if he can continue that. But the problem is also going into other regions. Like here we see a Yupik hunter on the Bering Sea ice. Everything looks on the picture maybe normal, but what we don't see is that the ice is melting, and they feel it because when they're hunting, it's getting more unpredictable, and the ice can break any time. It's very dangerous for them, and to catch something, they have to go further and further. What they also told me is that they saw already like a lot of seabirds which are just dying on the sea when they're going out fishing when there's no ice, because they don't find small fish anymore to eat, so they're just starving to death. Another place where the ice is melting it's not just on the polar regions, but also you have it in the mountain regions. This is, for example, in Pakistan. This is in the Karakoram. You have more landslides because the glaciers are melting. You have obviously changed weather patterns. You have more extreme weather events, and you see floods becoming more normal. I think a couple of weeks ago, you had some news already from India and Pakistan that there's floods again. This is becoming normal. A couple of years ago, there was like one of these huge floods in Pakistan. Yeah, but on the other hand, sometimes you have too much water, and often you have too little. This is also in Pakistan. It's often like a climate impact, climate change impact, but also human impact. You know, it's deforestation, it's different things. So how do we deal with that? Like if the people losing their home because they can't live there anymore, because they don't have food, because maybe like here, the ground won't be fertile anymore. They will go somewhere. And for that, I went a couple of years ago to a refugee camp actually inside the European Union. It was in Greece, in Samos. And I kind of want to leave you just with the picture and want to tell that what we're facing there is something bigger, because it will challenge our democracy and also our rule of law, what I experienced already there. Yeah, this is maybe all for now.
Thank you very much, Manolo, for making some of the diverse impacts of climate change visible for us, and for making it very, very clear in the beginning of this discussion. When we are talking about the Paris Agreement, when we are talking about international climate change politics, we're actually not talking just about numbers or about statistics or about documents, but of course about people and about their livelihoods, also about their culture. So thank you very much for this introduction to this panel discussion. Farhana, as I already mentioned during my short introduction, you have been actively involved in the Paris negotiation. You even have been described by some as one of the architects of the Paris Agreement. So we can be very proud to have you here with us today. And amongst others, you have been advisor to the Marshall Islands, which is the country that has initiated the High Ambition Coalition, which was crucial for the adoption of the Paris Agreement. From your perspective, how instrumental have been the most vulnerable countries, including, for example, the Marshall Islands, in creating the Paris Agreement, and to what extent have their perspective, or do you see their perspectives and their needs reflected in the agreement as we see it today?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of the organizers and I see many friends here in the audience as well who have played, Germany has played a crucial role. And from what I gather upon my arrival here 2 months ago is things are not as good on the climate front as they should be and as we need them to be. We need Germany to be stronger. We cannot have Germany wavering, going backwards, dismantling essentially its own goodwill that it has in the rest of the world. So for those of you who are close to the minister, close to the governments, please take that message back. We see what is happening, even in the first few short months, and it is a sign of great worry that is happening. Obviously, the rollback of climate action is happening, but we need countries like Germany to be the strongest possible voice for climate action and to not waver. So that's one of the most important things that I can say from the point of view of small islands, from the vulnerable countries, from all of those who have built this regime together. And the regime is my shorthand term for 3 treaties that we've negotiated over this period. For those of you who are eagle-eyed, I actually chose to wear my Kyoto badge today. It went better with the outfit. And I was really wanted to, I guess, show you this importance of resilience and resistance and challenging what the US does. You know, frankly, we abandoned Kyoto after, you know, putting it into force, letting it enter into force, having a second commitment period, because the US said it could not accept Kyoto. And now we've had the US walk out of Paris twice. So it underscores the need for which those of us who believe in climate action, those of us who also believe that climate action is the gateway for creating a better world, whether it's for health, whether it's for clean air, whether it's for clean waters, whether it's to solve the plastics problem, whether it's to deal with nature extraction, deforestation, biodiversity. This is all linked and part and parcel of climate change. So I think it's very, very important to remember that all of us created these 3 legal treaties together. They still stand, they are still standing, and we must keep them going, whatever the frustrations are. And Baku was one of the few COPs I've decided not to go to in the end. I had some health issues and I was too depressed after the election to go. But each one is making progress. And I think we need to understand what it is that we set out to do. I came here for COP1, which is the 10th anniversary of COP1 is now, it's this year. And I was a young woman of 30, so there you go. That's one of the reasons why I'm here for my sabbatical, to reflect, think. Thank you, Bosch, for allowing me to do that. And what we've achieved over this is actually monumental. Over this 30 years, we have shifted global norms, created robust institutions, enacted legislation, and the centerpiece of that right now is the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement has resulted in net zero targets covering around 90% of GDP, most of the world's population, 140 countries. These are figures just before the US withdrawal. But that is a phenomenal achievement over just 10 years. 10 years ago, we didn't have any of those. Now we have. So my argument to you, and I don't know how long I've got, Oliver, but I'll make it very succinct. I think we are witnessing a backlash. It's a very serious, well-funded, very organized, very violent, intense backlash. But that is what it is. It is the backlash of those who lost. They lost. They lost big time. They lost in the world of public opinion. 80% of the world's population still, in survey after survey, supports climate action. They lost in the world of the real economy. Investment in renewables was going up. Investment in fossil fuels was going down. And sadly, that has what ignited this, frankly, panic moment from those who benefit from business as usual, especially on fossil fuels. That has been the engine which has driven these toxic coalitions that have elected politicians who are dismantling everything. So the other thing that I think you should not forget, and which I don't forget, I'm a woman, I'm a Muslim, I'm a person of color living in the global north. We won pretty much everything. Over the last 30 years, in my lifetime alone as a lawyer in the UK where I live, we won gender equality. We won equal pay equality. We won rights for disabled, those who are differently abled. We won gay rights. We won trans rights. We won against the apartheid regime. We have won. And that is the most important and threatening thing for a vast array of people who are invested in the status quo and for whom that causes a lot of discomfort and fear and anxiety. This wonderful, diverse, multiracial, multicultural, mixed world that we are creating, including here in Germany, is a threat. It is not easy for people to handle that. I say that, you know, for 30 years I'm married to a Jewish guy and my children are Muslims. I take this really seriously. I need to create a very safe world for very diverse people. My children, your children, this is the world that is being created. And what we have to do, what is all this got to do with climate change? You're thinking in the Paris Agreement. Paris is a big part of that. It's become part of the lumped in as the woke agenda. All of these things are being attacked, including now, you know, the fundamentals of democracy, of the right to protest, because it is protest and non-violent civil disobedient protest that has resulted in many of these centuries-old struggles actually having the progresses that I described. It took 100 years to get gender equality. We're still not there, by the way. It will still take, you know, many decades more, hopefully less. It will take decades to dismantle racism. It will take decades to get full decolonization, including the assumptions that we make. And it will take probably decades to get decarbonization, which is all part of those Ds, is part and parcel of those Ds. And I guess in my slightly older age, I feel I focus less on just changing, you know, the molecules, greenhouse gas molecules and mitigation. You know, your slide 19, Johan, is great. But what's most important right now, as you describe the impacts and the tipping points and the very real cascade of devastation that is happening around the world, what's real right now in the photos that you see from Manolo is we need to create a safer world. We need to create a kinder world. And that is what's attractive and will draw people to us. We cannot keep scaring people. It doesn't work. We need to show them a safer, kinder world. We can't keep telling them AMOC is shutting down and then not say what we're going to do, because the thing is to say, actually, we are going to create systems that will enable you to deal with, you know, climate mobility, for example, which is planned and unplanned movement of people, whether it's migration, displacement, refugees. We need to create that world and vocally speak it and champion it. And I think that that is happening. So just 4 little sentences on Paris. We won everything. We got finally loss and damage, which, by the way, we had got a Warsaw mechanism in 2013, and we'd got originally a recognition that adaptation, including longer term, what was called stage 3 adaptation, which was loss and damage, back in 1995. So we've been making progress steadily all along, and this has been completed as a result of the fund that was set up. It's very small, the fund, compared with needs, 700 million compared with 400 billion. And the numbers are sort of scary. But actually, if we tackle things right, we do have the money to create a playing field where fossil fuels don't thrive as a result of subsidies, as a result of the lack of market signals that they're bearing. So I think we have made genuine progress, not just on 1.5, not just on net zero, not just on adaptation. The final piece of the Paris rulebook will be completed, hopefully, at COP30. So that will mark another phase in which all of this will come together. So I, you know, plead on, you know, Oliver's looking at me and saying that's quite a long piece. But yeah, now is not the time to question what that happens. I think what we need to do is change the modalities of how we're negotiating, where things happen, address process problems, get money to the front lines, support movement building, how to create this different narratives, different stories that attract people to vote for climate action because it gives them a better way of life.
Thank you. Farhana? Farhana, you just said, basically we have won and we see all these backlashes because the others have lost. Professor Rockström, having heard your very impressive presentation, keynote presentation, actually I rather got a little bit the impression maybe we are all not very far away from being lost. My first question to you here on the panel would be, is there anything next to the new findings from climate science that you already presented to us during your keynote presentation, which all rather go into the direction that we even underestimated the impacts of climate change 10 years ago? Is there anything from climate science, any new findings that can give us hope that could be maybe harnessed in the implementation of the Paris Agreement, that could be used to speed up climate protection in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I wish there was a kind of an easy yes to that question. But let me first just say how much I agree with Farhani on this point about us having won. Actually, I led a letter to Simon Steele, as the head of the UNFCCC, 2 years ago now, where we suggest a COP reform. And the first paragraph of that letter says that I think it's time to declare victory. It's time to celebrate. 30 COP meetings has taken us all the way to a point where we have essentially not a perfect agreement, but essentially the components we need for a safe, secure, equitable future for humanity within the climate regime. The challenge now is to change the structure so that we start meeting up and instead put the money on the table and start delivering and being accountable to everything that we have signed on to. And this is something that we underestimate, also based on what you pointed out, Fahani, that we know time and time again that 70, I wouldn't say up to 80, but on average in the world, 70% of citizens in the world are concerned about human-caused climate change and really want solutions. So they're all on board. And if I want to find evidence of a positive part from science, Olivier, it's not, unfortunately, as if we have underestimated any of the risks. On the contrary, over the past 10 years, there's only one direction of travel, which is that we've underestimated risk. But where there's light in the tunnel is all the science showing exactly, actually, what Farhani pointed out. We have the solutions. The solutions are scalable across all sectors, and they give better outcomes for security, for health, for stability, but even for prosperity and equity. And this is interesting, and this may actually mean that you're right in the sense that why are we seeing so much backlash right now? Could it be not only that the majority has, so to say, won, but also that the sustainable transition has become a real threat to status quo? It's no longer just a marginal thing. You know, when we met in Paris, nobody could say credibly, we know how to power the global economy with clean energy. Nobody could say that. Today, 10 years later, we can say that. We know we can run the German economy without being dependent on gas, coal, and oil. We can do that. We know the technologies are there. We know that they can actually run competitively, most of them, even without subsidies. We know that we can de-risk this even in the global south by putting in finance so that we can get down the discount rates. So these, I think, are the areas, even in the IPCC, that are actually on the positive side. It is truly a solvable pathway to the future. When it comes to the risk assessment, is there any light in the tunnel? Well, I think there's one, just to leave you with that, which is we're learning that the Earth system is actually a remarkably resilient system. And it's resilient thanks to its diversity. So diversity really plays in our favor. And it's incredible how we can knock many ecosystems to a point of basically collapse. But if you release the pressure, it has this remarkable bouncing back capacity, which has often overwhelmed us in its capacity to reestablish nurseries and marine systems, fish nurseries, but also forest systems, wetland systems. You can actually restore much more than we previously thought. But the problem is that we don't know if that can be done when you push yourself beyond thresholds too far. And that's where the overshoot becomes quite a nervous risk that we're facing. But so I think there are many positives, but particularly in the social science side.
Thank you, Professor Rockström. Before we continue the discussion, maybe I should tell those people who are sitting in the overflow rooms that we actually have a number of seats available here in the main room since we all moved to the stage now. So I don't want to have many people running into this room now and creating a lot of noise, because keeping the time in mind, we of course also want to continue with the discussion. But yeah, so there are a few seats available here. So if individual people would like to join us here in the main room, you're very welcome to do that. Kira, we have already heard in the opening statements and also during your interview with the minister that we are living in very turbulent times. We are in a crisis of multilateralism, or as a minister would maybe prefer to call it, we are at a moment where multilateralism is tested. We have seen the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement. The United Nations are in a severe financial crisis. We see global conflicts like the war against Ukraine that are undermining international cooperation and taking away attention from climate change. From your perspective, how does this very difficult geopolitical situation influence the further implementation of the Paris Agreement and international climate change politics more generally, particularly the withdrawal of the US?
Yeah, thanks for this complex question. I think of course, it's slowing the progress down. I mean, there's no denial in this. We could have really needed a US president that sticks to their agreement, that believes in the science. But we have a situation where the US is turning away from evidence-based policy in many areas, not only in climate change, in health, in economics. They're turning away from the evidence, democratically elected leader, government turning away. And at the same time, we have states like China, autocracies that are heavily investing in science and natural science in particular, that are also doing evidence-based policies in many regards. And this provides a lot of points for confusion also for middle powers like Germany, how to position themselves in between these different great powers who are taking different courses. But it could be worse, I would also say. So the UNFCCC negotiations, in my view, could have been much worse affected by all these upheavals and have remained a relatively neutral space in some regards. And so there is this hope that in Belém, people will not follow the Trump administration, but that states will continue to follow the process. And that's why the process is so important, this multilateral process. And it's to the great benefit of Germany. Germany is a complete benefactor of the multilateral system, and this is why it's in our own national interest to act upon it. And so I do see windows of opportunities for blame, but of course it won't be enough. We won't see a huge breakthrough, I don't think, at the COP in Brazil because of all these constraints. But we may see, and this is what has also happened in the past, we may see subgroups forming that are willing, like the Marshall Islands in the past, that are willing to take certain topics forward and that are willing to move faster than the consensus of the 194 states.
Thank you, Kira. Farhana, next to the geopolitical situation that definitely changed to the worse over the last 10 years, you already mentioned that we are seeing some backlashes from your point of view. What do you think are the major obstacles that we need to overcome for a more progressive implementation of the Paris Agreement for more progressive climate change policies in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think removal of the creation of a truly level field for renewables is critical. And we have not been able for decades, despite agreement at the G7, G8, under Obama 1, to remove fossil fuel subsidies. These are hugely distorting. So we have trillions going into fossil fuel subsidies still, trillions, and these are increasing, they're not decreasing. And at the same time, we're allowing the polluters to demand more public subsidy to pick up the costs of climate damages that are happening, which are essentially being borne by taxpayers. So this is actually a winning combination electorally, but we haven't been able to create the campaigns and the movements and the political momentum to sell that to people, which is kind of crazy. There is money there. There is public ways in which finance has to be reformed. And I think, and I'm also, I joined Extinction Rebellion in 2018 and glued myself to Shell because I thought, what the hell, I'm not writing one more paper. There's no point doing that. It's better to do that. And it was the right strategic move. So I feel strategically, actually, we have to focus on the finance sector. The finance sector has not done its share. It's not done what Paris was supposed to do. It has not aligned with the Paris Agreement in any way, in any fundamental way whatsoever. And it's going backwards the fastest in terms of the backlash, right? It's going backwards the fastest. So fossil fuels last year got an increase in investment, and this was, really going against the trend. So I'm not kidding myself saying that we won. Definitely they are, doubling down and are wrecking and creating what they think is best, but they're doing it through policy change, and we can win policy. We have, as Johannes said, we won the science, we won the economics, we won the solutions, we won the hearts and minds of people. We've got it in us to do this and to withstand that. And I feel that that's what's, in my view, listen, I, say this as also someone from the global south who lives in the global north. There's a little bit of backbone that's needed right now, and I feel that actually people are cowed and down and dismayed, and it's almost like they can't kind of get their heads around it. And I feel like some of the people and movements from the global south, I guess we've borne a lot more in history. I mean, I was also a young child when we had military dictatorship, and I saw the end of military dictatorship in my country. It's gone back and forth. Obviously, I come from Pakistan. But I think there's a way of viewing history and resistance that is kind of foundational and in the DNA. And I think, Arne, you said that, they're fighting for their land, their homes, their culture, their existence, and maybe fighting for extra living standards, or the anxiety that our living standards may drop isn't quite the same motivator. So that's why I feel like, the vocabularies that I use talking about what life will be like here is important, and also understanding and learning from what is going on in terms of climate disasters in Europe, in the US, the wildfires, learning. There's a new report that just came out on Hurricane Katrina, and the huge, damages that was caused, but also the damages to low-income Black and brown families, to working people. All of that is uninsured now. I mean, another one comes, there's no insurance at all because the insurance markets have withdrawn, basically. And not only that, Oliver, they are using the premiums that they still collect to fund fossil fuel investment. It's kind of bonkers. So I feel like, yeah, my eyesights are turned on, bringing the fossil fuel industry and the financing of fossil fuel investment to task and doing that well. And also making sure that there is direct, accessible, immediate funding available for those on the front line of these impacts, and that we do not allow nature may be unkind to us now, but we must not be unkind to ourselves, and we must create these kinder systems.
Thank you, Farhana. Unfortunately, we are already a little bit over, well, not over time, but already further in time than we actually planned according to the schedule. And of course, we want to give you in the audience also some time to pose questions. So yeah, but I would like to continue with the questions to the other panelists here on the panel as well. Professor Rockström, you've made it very, very clear in your keynote presentation that the target to limit global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is key from a scientific perspective. It actually also has been strengthened from a legal perspective recently. A couple of weeks ago, we had this groundbreaking advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice that underlined it considers 1.5 and not well below 2 degrees the legal threshold of the agreement. Another central element of the Paris Agreement that also has been strengthened in this ICJ advisory opinion are the nationally determined contributions. So if we want to bring those two elements together, how or to what extent do the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, for example, of Europe, we're expecting a new NDC from Europe. We heard about it in the interview with the minister earlier. How ambitious do they need to be compared to what we have on the table at the very moment?
Yeah, no, thanks. So the first thing, which I believe to be perhaps one of the most important topics to secure at COP30 in Belém, is to get the world's gathered nations to agree to hold on to 1.5 under all circumstances, to not allow the fact that we are now in moving rapidly towards breaching 1.5 and entering overshoot as an argument to abandon 1.5. We should stay with 1.5, even if we will at best temporarily exceed it before coming back. And there's so much scientific support for that. And as you point out, Oliver, also now legal support. And I think the International Court of Justice advisory opinion is groundbreaking in that sense. And what does this mean then for the nationally determined contributions? Well, my view is that that's one of the weakest points of the Paris Agreement, that we have this legal framework, but this voluntary national reporting system. I wish I had a Kyoto pin, because I think one of the beauties of the Kyoto Protocol is that it had, compulsory quantitative numbers for every nations. You knew on the table what you were expected to deliver, like the European Union does in the Green Deal. And it's working very well, by the way, for Europe, and it could work for the world. So what I think we need is to get a legally binding, a much more accountable framing for the NDCs. And of course, they have to align with science. That is in the framework, by the way. I mean, it's well established in the legal text that there is a possibility to adjusting the mitigation pathways based on the advancements in science. And as I shared with you, today, the pathway is that we have to reduce emissions by at least 5% per year globally to stay on a track that can take us close, at least, to a net zero world economy by 2050, because we have made no progress over the past 10 years. We are continuing to increase emissions. Now, can that be done? The answer is barely yes. I mean, in terms of economics and technologies, but it has to be entered into the NDCs. And that's not the case. As you know, if you add up all the NDCs, at best you are today at 2.7, but you're gradually actually more like 3.1. So, but my final point is just to say that promising things on paper won't make a difference today. It's so urgent that we really need to meet at COP meetings and report on progress and be held accountable to that. Not only have these paper commitments all the time. And I think the European Union here is the world's leader. There's no region in the world, by the way, the largest economic region in the world, with Germany in a lead, because Germany is the world's third largest economy. I mean, here you have very important power. If Germany and the European Union can succeed to show that we can create jobs, have good economic development, and follow a pathway that decarbonizes, that is a signal of success. It's a signal of who wants to miss that train? And that is what I think we need to also start really proving to the world.
Thank you. Manolo, you are trying to capture the impacts of climate change in your photographs, as you have very impressively shown us in the beginning of this presentation. What are actually the challenges that you face in this work? And are there any limitations? Are there any impacts of climate change that simply cannot be pictured?
Actually, the problem is that you have to make the invisible visible. For example, let's say ocean warming. You have to find a story like here that something is happening there, because otherwise you cannot show it. But it's getting very difficult sometimes, because if you want to see the melting ice in the Arctic, actually this picture would just be water and nobody would understand it as well. This is why often you have just like breaking icebergs or starving polar bears, which is getting like everybody is like getting sick of it. So yeah, you have to find personal stories, I think, like somebody like who's losing something, making it emotional.
Thank you, Manolo. Yeah, in the end, personal stories, personal livelihoods do matter, should be put in the focus. Kira, one of the focal points of your work is the nexus between climate change and security, and also human mobility that has been prompted by climate change. From your perspective, to what extent is climate change already pushing people to leave their homes today? And what do we need in addition to the Paris Agreement that does not mention human mobility to address this challenge in all its dimensions?
Okay, I'll try to keep my answer brief, so we still can get some audience questions. But it is already shaping migratory movements in many different ways. So, of course, the most severe is the form of displacement, so involuntary movements, often as a reaction to an extreme weather event. And here we are seeing, for example, the data from last year, IDMC, internal displacement monitoring data, that almost 50 million displacements happened in 2024 because of natural disasters, and most of these are weather related, and many of these weather-related extremes are becoming more frequent and more intense. So we are seeing that people are being displaced, many can return, but there's also people who are finding themselves in protected displacement situations. And so we need more answers, and we need to also face the question, what happens if several regions, places in our own home countries become potentially uninhabitable? Uninhabitable is not a sort of defined sort of measure. It is defined by the climate impacts in this sense, but it is also defined by how many technological and financial capacities we are endowing to keep these places habitable. So, of course, humans have settled in very adverse conditions, but we will be faced with the questions, where do we invest? Do we invest in the Halligen? Do we invest in Tokelau? And of course, as climate impacts get more severe, budgets will get more constrained of where to invest to keep places habitable. And questions of culture, religious value, questions of economic value of land, all these questions will come into play and will create friction. But then, and my last point to this is also the question of how can we enable people to move as an adaptation to climate change, as a successful move? How can we transform this migration stories into success stories? Because we are looking at the numbers here in Germany, we have big demographic issues here, in many other countries as well. We will not meet those with the mindset we have currently against migrants in Germany. We will not be able to fill these gaps in the labor market, and we need to think these things jointly and think about how can we value skills that people are bringing here, how can we become more flexible for adapting to situations where people may have diplomas in different languages in different countries, and how can we acknowledge what also it can bring to our economy, to our society for our development. I think only in this way we will be able to prosper in the medium term.
We have some minutes left for questions from the audience. I would suggest that we are maybe selecting 2 or 3 questions. And I also would like to invite those people who are not here in the main room, but in one of the overflow rooms. If you want to pose a question, that is possible. Please, in that case, come forward to the door to the main room so that we can see you, and then you also have the chance to pose a question. But I've seen 2 arms here. Maybe you would like to start with your question. And I would like to ask all of you to really state a question, and with regards to the time, try to keep yourself short.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion so far. My name is Jelena Bäumler, professor from Leuphana University, Lüneburg. And I would like to pick up on the idea of how can we actually achieve progress. And in my work, I think a lot about how deep must we think about a transformation of the legal system as it currently stands, and in this case, the international legal order. And I would like to draw your attention to the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability, which some of you who go to Belém can probably take as an example, and actually something that we should press the EU on to join, because it actually tries to build a green market next to the conventional market, in which there is competition and free market for environmental goods, for which we could probably feel better to consume, at least as an alternative to the conventional products. So my question is, how do you see the chances of the EU to actually hiding behind some geopolitics arguments not to join for reasons of China and the competition for renewable energy products? And my second, more concrete question goes with regard to
very short, please.
With regard to the advisory opinion. Is the Global South actually taking the advisory opinion as well, if I may use this term, as well as the Global North, in terms of not realizing, or at least leaving it open, that a very basic principle of justice, namely that you do harm, you repair, is left very open under what conditions that could be realized? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we take another question over there.
Yeah, thank you. Sascha Müller-Krenner, Deutsche Umwelthilfe. So I'm very grateful to the German Council on Foreign Relations of having a conversation here on the climate crisis. And I think you should do more of those because the issue has basically disappeared from German foreign politics. And I can maybe share an observation. Kira, we both were at the event yesterday at the German Foreign Office where Chancellor Friedrich Merz spoke to the diplomatic corps, and he spoke about 30 minutes about geopolitics, about trade, and he just mentioned climate policy in passing and only as one of the things to discuss with China. So, and this is the problem that we have, because why was Kyoto a success? It was a success because Angela Merkel could call Helmut Kohl in the last night. Why was Paris a success? Because Barbara Hendricks could call Angela Merkel. I have serious doubts that Mr. Schneider can call Friedrich Merz if we do not have that conversation in the coming months. So this is the challenge to the foreign policy community here to make sure that climate change remains part of the foreign policy conversation as we have had it in the last years.
Thank you. And we take a third question from the other room.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Joaquin Capos. I'm a student at the Hertie School. And my question goes to Professor Rockström. And I would like to touch upon this discussion when you mentioned planetary boundaries and against that backdrop, this discussion about, on the one side, people arguing that growth is still possible within these planetary boundaries, and on the other side, people arguing that we actually need to go into the direction of degrowth. And my question is, how do you evaluate this approach of degrowth? Do you see any success in that? Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. Professor Rockström, since you have been directly addressed by the last question, maybe you would like to start to answer on this question, but also picking up on the other questions, if you like.
Yeah, and I'll focus on this final question, giving room to my fellow panelists for the other ones. They were more challenging. Growth is a small issue, isn't it? So this, well, I should start by saying that this question always comes up of how do we look upon growth and economic development within the safe operating space of planetary boundaries? And the simple answer is that we don't care, because the science behind defining and quantifying the safe planetary boundaries is entirely based only on Earth system science. We're making no assumptions on neither human needs nor human aspirations or economic feasibility or development. We define the safe space, and then whether we within that space have growth or degrowth is up to other actors to play the game within the safe boundaries that we've provided. That said, of course, it's a bit sneaky way to kind of step out of the question, because it's a really good question. And I would argue that today there's no evidence that we can come back into the safe operating space with the current growth paradigm we have. So that is a planet-destroying pathway, undoubtedly. We're simply not measuring the qualities of the planetary boundaries within our economic accounting system. But is degrowth the pathway to solution? I have my doubts. And the reason for that is simply back to Nahala's point that the winning path today, the winning story, is a story where sustainability becomes the winning pathway towards a prosperous, equitable, modern future where we have better quality of life, more secure life, and actually a better economy. And the degrowth argument, which is a good one in terms of circularity, in terms of resource use, in terms of measuring what is really worth to measure, comes across as being a pathway towards stepping back and therefore stepping kind of downwards rather than moving in a positive way to the future. So I think it's more a narrative issue. I don't think it's wrong with degrowth as such. I think it's a question of being more analytical in what we mean by planetary boundary aligned economic development. And I would say, by the way, that we know how to do that. Just look at the Parthadas Gupta UK government commissioned report on the economics of biodiversity, which was launched for the Glasgow COP. He states clearly we need a steady state economy within planetary boundaries, and that this can be accomplished without adopting necessarily degrowth or a GDP-based economy. So I think there is a broader debate here that is required, but of course there's urgency as well. So we have to move very fast, and that is one of the big challenges we have.
Thank you, Professor Rockström. Farhana, would you like to add maybe on the question on ICJ, but also other question if you like?
Yeah. So the ICJ advisory opinion came out on the 23rd of July, so it's less than 2 months, and it was requested by the General Assembly, so the General Assembly will receive the opinion back, and then there's a question about what will it do and what will other organizations, international organizations, other parts of the UN and all countries, because it's not just addressed to Paris parties, it's addressed to everyone who is under an obligation to obey international law, basically. So yes, it applies to China. China's NDC must be 1.5 aligned. Indonesia's, India's, Pakistan's, every country that is going to put forward an NDC should align it. So when they align it, how they align it, they still have, you know, most countries have not submitted their NDCs as of yet, which is terrible, but, you know, they must, and we've provided means for unilaterally ratcheting them up over due course. So this takes time. And I think that also every company, every sector that has sector targets, company targets, corporate targets, everything, everyone has to align them with 1.5. And that means a serious examination looking at what that means. That is the due process that is required right now for countries, as I said, and other actors who are directly addressed by international obligations, who are under international obligations. And I just want to say that also, you know, this point about resilience and taking action, this opinion came about largely as a result of Pacific Island youth, Pacific Island lawyers, many lawyers, allies helped, but it has taken, you know, about 5 years. And I, as a lawyer, look, I don't want to overstate its significance. It was a unanimous opinion, very rare to get a unanimous opinion from the ICJ with such affirmation. So it's a real huge achievement, and it will have really deep consequences, I think, for years to come, but it takes time for it to develop. And I think I'll hand over the question about the EU, the green markets issue, maybe to Kira.
Kira, would you like to add on that question?
Yeah, maybe I can connect it to the broader question on growth and how we can shape our future in the end. So the devastation that you have talked about in the beginning, the extent to which we are transforming the Earth system, in a way, it's also testament to human ingenuity, right? Like we are able to change the surface area of the ocean and expand it into landmass. I mean, on a global scale, it's really mind-boggling. But at the same time, our species is too stupid or too ill-coordinated to shape it in a way that creates abundance for us, right? So not to cling to this extractivism model of extracting for one-time use. We have to go towards the circular way and shape the Earth system to provide ecological abundance for the betterment of our societies, for our common future. And I think this is really the task at hand. And I do believe that the EU will broadly stay course with the Green Deal. And it will have to also safeguard some of the technologies where we still have a competitive edge over China, for example, because I fully believe in what you were referring to with leading through sustainability into a modern world. I think this can be achieved through the technologies that we have at hand, and only through becoming more sustainable and becoming more circular, we will have this competitive edge in the future, not by clinging to sort of dinosaur technologies. And the question of climate and foreign policy, I think we see today that it is inextricably linked. And I do believe that Germany will continue in this discussions to place it close to foreign policy, even if the ministries have now divided in a different way, the COP negotiators. But it will remain part of our foreign policy, which is, of course, shaped by the Foreign Office, but also shaped by other actors. And of course, we are holding this discussion today under the label of climate and Paris, but it is a security discussion that we're having. And this is why it remains relevant also in times of geopolitical crisis.
Thank you, Kira. Manolo, I'm not sure whether you would like to add on one of the questions stated by the audience, but I would actually add another question to you, which then would be kind of the closing statement for this panel. So when you are taking your photographs and meeting people all around the world, do you actually have conversations with them about climate change? And is there anything that gives these people hope? Is there anything that we maybe can learn from their experiences here for us in Germany, and also maybe globally for climate change politics?
Obviously, we can learn a lot, especially from indigenous people who maybe have been facing different challenges all the time. When I was in Alaska, they told me they are not really afraid of the ice melting because they are living in such a harsh climate all their lives over generations. So they know how to adapt. They more fear that we can't adapt. We are like, we have the problem here. So on the other hand, a lot of countries, or a lot of people in different countries, they see us as a role model still. I don't know how long still. And we can give innovation and also maybe show a playbook like how to do it, and they will adapt to it. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just criticize that we are always very paternalizing, and I think we have to change that. We have to be more on eye level with a lot of people and take justice serious, because we are the ones who brought them in this, or brought us all in this problem historically. But still at the moment, we are talking a lot, but we are not really doing so much.
Thank you very much, Manolo. And thank you to all of you, Farhana, Johan Rockström, Kira Finke, for this panel discussion. Of course, we will have some time to continue the discussions during the receptions that will follow. But before we come to that, I will briefly switch back to German language, because this is a multilingual event, as it has been said before. And I would like to invite Detlef Jimbritsky to come to the stage for the closing remarks. Herr Jimbritsky, Sie haben jetzt noch das Wort für ein paar Schlussbemerkungen.
Lieber Asenkamp, vielen Dank, aber vielen Dank ans Panel. Natürlich vermessen, jetzt zu erwarten, eine solche Diskussion zusammenzufassen, aber ich fand sie ganz spannend, und mit dem Minister will ich noch mal festhalten, dass wir eine Bewährungsprobe vor uns haben, dass eine Bewährung ansteht, ob es gelingt, quasi das, was vor 10 Jahren als Klimavereinbarung getroffen wurde in Paris, ob wir wirklich in der Lage sind, das zu erfüllen. Professor Rockström hat darauf hingewiesen, der Hinkefuß dabei ist die Freiwilligkeit und nicht das völkerrechtlich Verbindliche. Aber nun hören wir ja jetzt immer häufig von der Koalition der Willigen. Vielleicht machen wir daraus einen Wettbewerb der Willigen, wer sich hier am stärksten einbringt, um aus dieser Klimavereinbarung vor 10 Jahren wieder eine Erfolgsgeschichte zu machen. Ich glaube, darauf kommt es an, dass man nicht in Depression verfällt, sondern dass man das Ziel vor Augen behält und dass man sich einbringt und dass die Länder, die Nationen sich hier zusammenraufen. Ich habe dem Carsten Schneider ja mit auf den Weg gegeben, Persönlichkeiten bestimmen die Politik, aber auch im Negativen. Es ist natürlich furchtbar, was im Augenblick in den Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika passiert. Es ist furchtbar, was Autokraten anstellen, und es ist schlimm, was Populisten bewegen können. Deswegen muss man da versuchen, auch wieder die Hoheit, die Deutungshoheit zurückzugewinnen. Ich fand das sehr gut, dass Sie bemerkt haben, Sicherheit ist wichtig für die Menschen. Das wird ja auch im Augenblick in Deutschland und in Europa heftig diskutiert. Ich fand das, wie Sie mit Sicherheit auch, wirklich wichtig und immer wieder interessant, Herr Professor Rockström, wie Ihr Institut in der Lage ist, deutlich zu machen, belastbar deutlich zu machen, welche Herausforderungen der Klimawandel bringt und wenn wir uns diesen Herausforderungen nicht stellen, welche Konsequenzen das hat. Man könnte auch sagen, das ist ein Bedrohungsszenario. Und wir haben andererseits, weil wir von Sicherheit sprechen, das Bedrohungsszenario, das nur sehr stark mit Krieg in Europa, mit Krieg in Afrika, mit Krieg in Nahost zusammenhängt. Es ist jetzt ein bisschen simpel, ich sage das vorweg, aber warum schaffen es die Militärs immer so stark, ihr Bedrohungsszenario in einer Weise in den Vordergrund zu rücken, dass man sehr schnell dazu kommt, 5% vom Bruttosozialprodukt für Militär auszugeben? Warum schaffen wir es nicht? Ich sage jetzt bewusst wir. Das Bedrohungsszenario und Klimakatastrophe, das ja mit Sicherheit genauso viel Bedrohungspotenziale hat, dahingehend zu bringen, dass auch hier die entsprechenden finanziellen Ressourcen freigemacht werden. Man könnte diese Diskussion vertiefen. Ich weiß, dass man da auch sehr schnell missverstanden werden kann. Ich bin sehr wohl der Meinung, dass wir eine europäische militärische Sicherheit brauchen, um das nochmal zu unterstreichen. Aber ich bin auch der Meinung, dass alles im Gleichgewicht bleiben muss und dass wir die Klimakatastrophe mit Sicherheit nicht verniedlichen dürfen, sondern als Bedrohung und als Bewährungsprobe befassen müssen. Ich denke, dass uns das heute Abend hier bewusst geworden ist. Dafür bedanke ich mich und ich denke, und ich habe da gesehen, dass da wohl Getränke bereitstehen, dass noch die Gespräche im anschließenden Kreis einigen Ertrag bringen werden. Vielen, vielen Dank. Ihnen persönlich alles Gute. Ich fand es eine großartige Veranstaltung. Dank nochmal an die hiesigen Gastgeber in besonderer Weise.